We're at the Commodity Classic in Orlando. Joining me, John Torres, and he works with Ohio Corn and Wheat as their Director of Government Affairs. So somehow we drug you into a conversation then to tell us more about LEBOR and the big vote up for the folks in Toledo. Set the stage. When did this idea that we would give the lake its own identity, how far back did this idea get started?
This idea really goes back probably a couple of years. Every 2 years the state of Ohio is required to issue what's called an integrated report on the health of the major bodies of water that might be impaired or have some sort of problems with them. And so, 2 years ago, environmental groups came forward and said, look, you should have impaired the lake in 2016 on your 2016 report. We're going to sue. They did sue. Ohio took corrective steps and said, all right, we give in. We will impair the lake in 2016 and 2018. But according to the environmentalists, we haven't moved fast enough for them. Apparently in 2 years, we should solve all the lake's problems. And so they have been looking for every tool they can find to get their agenda pushed through as fast as possible. And so this is their latest tool that they are employing to advance their agenda for the lake.
And in this case, what they're really trying to do with the vote was to give, I don't want to say give it its own identity number, but the lake needed to have an identity so we could protect it.
Yeah, what I say is they wanted to make the lake a person. And as any person, you or I, have legal rights. If the lake is a person, then it does have legal rights. But they would say the lake is an indefensible person or entity, and so therefore it needs help defending itself. And the help would be granted to it by passing the LEBOR law and allowing the citizens of the city of Toledo to come to the lake's defense as a legal entity, as a person, as whatever you want to call it.
Break LEBOR down for us. What's it stand for?
So LEBOR stands for the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. Just like we have in the Constitution our Bill of Rights as citizens of the country, the environmental groups feel that the lake needs its own set of Bill of Rights. However, they don't enumerate them like we do in the U.S. Constitution. It's a little bit more fuzzier than that.
So they had a special election to decide if, in fact, we could give the lake rights.
Yep. So they had a special election. They put a ballot initiative on the Toledo's ballot. They tried actually this past fall, and there were some questions concerning the process that the Lewis County Board of Directors or Board of Elections took to get it on the ballot. So there was an injunction filed in the Ohio Supreme Court. The ballot did not make it on the November ballot. The Supreme Court went and reviewed the process that the Board of Elections went through and found that the process to get the ballot initiative on the ballot was properly filed, and so they came back with a special election and it was allowed to proceed forward with a vote.
That's not something that's inexpensive, is it, to have a special election?
No, it's very expensive. All those elections come at the cost to the local community, and in this instance, City Council of Toledo had to pay for this particular vote. You're talking a couple $100,000, if not more, to make sure that you're advertising, you're doing your due diligence to let the citizens know that there's an election coming up, to print up the ballots or get your electronic voting machines, to do all that work, to pay volunteers or pay election officials to do all that work. It's not cheap.
So they voted, it passed. Any idea how many people voted?
We're looking at about 8,000 to 9,000 people in total voted. When you look at the total registered voters in the city limits of Toledo, you've got about 169,000 people. So about 9% of those registered turned out to vote.
And as we look back on it now, from when they announced the outcome of the vote till about 12 hours later, someone had already filed a lawsuit against them.
Yeah, we knew that as soon as this thing passed, or didn't pass, but we were thinking that if it passed, there would be immediate legal action on one side or the other, and that's exactly what happened yesterday morning. After the sun rose after the election, that there was the first legal action that was taken from one of Ohio's farm families.
And the Dravis family, of course, we asked them if they wanted to comment, and they're in the middle of a lawsuit, so they can't comment. But what would be the reason someone would then take this City of Toledo already to task on it?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is that it puts everybody, not just farmers, everybody in risk in the Western Lake Erie watershed. And even further than that, as far as our analysis can tell, is if you live in any one of about 35 counties that surrounds the lake in northwest and north central Ohio, any counties in Michigan, any areas in Ontario, Canada, and probably parts of Pennsylvania and New York, you're subject to in theory, this law that the people of Toledo have passed. And so it's not just farmers, it's anybody that somebody in the city of Toledo thinks may be contributing to pollution in the lake, however they define it as a citizen-led lawsuit.
charter boat captain. They're saying emissions on your boat wasn't good enough.
Absolutely. If they wanted to go after charter boat captains, if they wanted to go after maybe a company that distributes fertilizer and farm inputs up on the Maumee Bay, if they wanted to go after even the city of Toledo, which has a combined sewer municipal wastewater system. We do know that from time to time during periods of heavy rain, municipalities have to release wastewater because of retention issues. The city could end up suing itself, in theory, under this new law.
Now, there's been question before the vote even happened that whatever the outcome would probably be considered unconstitutional, but the way we understand the system, you can't decide whether it's unconstitutional until you have actually something to determine. So now that it's passed, now we have the lawsuit, now the question will be, we can go back and analyze, is it really unconstitutional?
Yeah, and that's really the basis of this lawsuit that's been filed in the court, is saying, all right, now that we have a law on the books, now the law needs to be examined. Now, common sense would generally tell people we should examine the law before we ask people to vote on it. But the way our system is set up, people, if they get enough signatures, can put whatever they want on the ballot. And in Ohio, we're a pretty easy state for that to happen. And so what we want the courts to do now is hit the pause button. Let's hit pause. Let's have the legal minds look at this and say, does this meet the muster of what's required under the state constitution and the U.S. Constitution, especially looking at the law moves beyond the jurisdictions of the city limits of Toledo.
John Torres, my guest, as he brings us up to date on the latest from protecting water quality in Lake Erie.